Part 1. The Wire in the Dark, Vermont, late October 1955. The Chevrolet Bel Air was doing maybe 35 along the narrow dirt road that cut through the black spruce. Rain had stopped an hour ago, but the trees were still dripping and the whole forest smelled like wet iron and pine pitch. In the back seat, a young man was slowly dying. His name was Raymond LeClaire, 23, just discharged from the Army, trying to get from Burlington to his parents' house in Barre before the first real snow. He had accepted the ride 20 minutes earlier at the gas station on Route 2. The woman had been very pretty. The man driving had been quiet, polite, almost fatherly. Right now, Raymond could no longer feel his legs. His tongue felt thick and huge. His heart was slamming against his ribs like it was trying to get out before the rest of him died. The woman sitting beside him on the back seat was named Ellery Finch Voss, 31 years old, very pale skin, very dark hair pinned up in a way that had been fashionable maybe 6 years earlier. She was calmly winding something around her right hand, a thin steel picture-hanging wire, the kind that comes on big spools at the hardware store. She had already made the first loose loop around his neck while he was still trying to understand why his knees wouldn't listen to him. "Shh," she said, very gently, almost motherly. "You're doing fine, sweetheart." Raymond tried to lift his arms. Nothing happened the way it was supposed to. The man driving, Harlan Voss, didn't even look in the rearview mirror. He just kept the car steady, 35 miles an hour. No more, no less. Exactly the speed that doesn't look suspicious on these back roads. Ellery leaned in very close. Her breath smelled like wintergreen and something faintly metallic. "You know what I think?" she whispered. "I think most people spend their whole life never really knowing how fragile the thread is. One tiny pull, and everything unravels." She slipped the second loop over his head. Then she crossed the wire. Then she pulled. Not fast, not savage, slow, very nearly loving. Raymond's eyes got very large. A thin, wet sound came out of his throat. Not even a scream, more like air being pushed through a broken harmonica. Harlan finally spoke. First word since they picked the boy up. "Headlights." Ellery immediately let the wire go slack. Raymond sucked in one huge, whistling breath. His body jerked like a fish. A pair of headlights appeared far ahead, coming towards them on the narrow road. Ellery very calmly gathered the wire back into her palm. She laid her hand on Raymond's cheek like a mother checking for fever. "Almost there, darling," she murmured. "Just a few more minutes." The oncoming car passed them. Old Ford pickup. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel, the small Vermont salute. Harlan touched his own fingers to the wheel in answer. When the taillights disappeared in the mirror, Ellery picked the wire up again. This time she didn't speak. This time she just leaned her whole small body weight backwards and pulled. The sound Raymond made was very short, very final. After that, there was only the rain dripping from the spruces and the very soft ticking of the Chevrolet's big clock on the dashboard and the slow, wet rasp of the wire cutting deeper. When it was finished, Ellery sat very still for almost a minute, breathing through her mouth. Then she reached forward and lightly touched her husband's shoulder. "Harlan?" He nodded once, didn't turn around. "Next right is the old tote road," he said quietly. "Should be dry enough." Ellery looked down at the body beside her. She touched Raymond's hair once, almost tenderly, then began to hum something very old and very soft while she started the long, careful work of cleaning the wire. Harlan turned right onto the almost invisible logging road. The trees closed behind them like a door. Somewhere far away, an owl asked its deep, stupid question. Nobody answered. The Chevrolet kept moving deeper into the dark. Very slowly, very carefully. 35 miles an hour. Exactly the speed that doesn't look suspicious on these back roads. Part 2. The Belladonna Supper, Vermont, late October 1955, the same night. The tote road ended in a small clearing where loggers had quit 20 years earlier. Nothing grew there anymore except thin grass and a few stubborn chokecherries. The Chevrolet stopped with the engine still running. Headlights stayed on, cutting 2 pale tunnels through the mist. Ellery stepped out first. She wore a dark wool coat that had once belonged to her mother. The coat was too big. The sleeves swallowed her hands. She liked that. It made her feel smaller than she was. Harlan killed the engine. Silence rushed in. Only the ticking of the cooling motor and the drip from branches. They worked without speaking much. Harlan opened the back door. Raymond Leclerc's body had already begun to stiffen at the joints. The wire had left a thin purple necklace just under the jawline. Ellery reached in and straightened the young man's collar the way a mother might before church. "Poor thing," she murmured. "Never even finished his story about Korea." Harlan grunted. He was already pulling the canvas tarp from under the front seat. Military surplus. Still smelled faintly of motor oil and canvas preservative. They wrapped him together. Careful, almost respectful. Ellery tucked the edges in like she was making a bed. Then Harlan lifted the bundle. He was stronger than he looked. Years of splitting wood and heaving hay bales. Ellery took the flashlight and led the way deeper into the trees. They had chosen the spot months earlier. A natural depression where the ground stayed soft, even in late fall. Pine needles thick as carpet. No rocks. No roots to fight the shovel. Harlan dug first. Ellery held the light steady. The blade bit into the black soil with a wet, sucking sound. After 2 feet, she took a turn. Her strokes were smaller, but quicker. She sang under her breath, not the same lullaby from the car, something older, French-Canadian, the words half-remembered from her grandmother. Quand j'étais chez mon père, petit et jeune garçon. The hole reached 3 feet. Good enough. They lowered Raymond in. The tarp made a dry rustle against the dirt walls. Ellery knelt at the edge. She dropped in the things he'd carried, a pack of Lucky Strikes, a Zippo with a scratched RL on the side, a folded letter from his mother postmarked 3 weeks ago, a small silver Sacred Heart medal on a thin chain. She kept the medal for a moment between her fingers, then let it fall. Harlan began shoveling the dirt back. Quick, efficient, no wasted motion. When the ground was level again, Ellery raked pine needles over the spot with her boot until nothing looked disturbed. She stepped back, tilted her head, nodded once. "Looks like any other piece of woods," she said softly. Harlan wiped the shovel blade on a rag. Then he wiped his hands. Then he looked at his wife. She was smiling. Not wide, not manic, just a small, private curve of the mouth. The same smile she used when the first tomato of summer finally turned red. They walked back to the car side by side. Harlan carried the shovel over his shoulder like a soldier's rifle. Ellery carried the flashlight and the wire, now neatly coiled inside a small tin that once held cough drops. In the car, Harlan started the engine. He let it idle a minute while the heater blew warm against their legs. Ellery leaned her head against the window. The glass was cold. She liked the contrast. "I keep thinking about the supper," she said. Harlan raised one eyebrow. He rarely used more than one. "The night we lost him," she continued. "Little James. He wouldn't eat the applesauce, kept pushing it away. I thought he was just being stubborn." Harlan stared straight ahead. "He was already sick," he said. "We didn't know." Ellery nodded slowly. "I know, but sometimes I think, if I'd made him eat just one more spoonful, maybe the fever wouldn't have come so fast." Silence again. Then Harlan spoke very quietly. "That's not how it works, Elle." "I know," she whispered, "but I still think it." He put the car in gear. They drove out of the woods the same way they'd come in. Slow, careful, 35 miles an hour. When they reached the farmhouse, the porch light was still burning, a single yellow bulb. Moths danced around it in lazy circles. Ellery paused at the bottom step. "Tomorrow I'll make pie," she said. "Apple. The ones from the back orchard are finally sweet." Harlan nodded. "Sounds good." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. The clock on the mantel chimed 2:15. Ellery took off her coat, hung it carefully on the hook by the door. Then she went to the kitchen, opened the cupboard under the sink. There, behind the lye soap and the ammonia, sat a small brown bottle with a faded pharmacist's label. Atropa belladonna, tincture. Harlan had traded a load of cordwood for it 2 summers ago. Said it was for pain relief. The old German apothecary in Montpelier hadn't asked questions. Ellery held the bottle to the light. The liquid inside looked like weak tea. She smiled again, that same small, private smile. "Next time," she said to the empty kitchen, "we'll try it in coffee. See how long it takes." She put the bottle back. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to bed. Harlan was already there, waiting. Neither of them spoke again that night. Outside, the first thin snow of the season began to fall, very quietly, very softly, covering the Tote Road, covering the new-turned earth, covering everything. Part 3. The Mechanic and the Martini. Vermont, August 1957. The Rusty Nail Tavern sat at the edge of Montpelier like a tired dog that refused to move. Neon beer signs flickered in the windows. Inside, it smelled of spilled Narragansett, cigarette smoke, and the faint, sweet rot of old linoleum. Ellery Voss walked in at 9:30 on a Friday night, wearing a navy dress with white polka dots. The hem stopped just above the knee, daring for Vermont in '57. She carried a small straw clutch and a smile that looked like she'd practiced it in the mirror until it was perfect. She slid onto a stool 2 seats down from the man she'd already chosen. Calvin Cal Dupuis, 34, mechanic at Bouchard's Garage on State Street. Tall, big-shouldered, hands permanently stained with grease even after 3 scrubbings with lava soap. Divorced 6 months. Drinking more since then. Everyone in town knew the story. Ellery ordered a martini, extra dry, 2 olives. She sipped once, then turned her head just enough to catch his eye. "Hot night," she said. Cal looked up from his whiskey sour. His eyes traveled the length of her dress and back up again. He gave the half-smile men give when they think they still have a chance. "Supposed to cool off after midnight," he answered. "Least that's what the radio says." Ellery laughed, a small, musical sound. I never trust the radio. Too many voices telling you what to feel. She lifted her glass toward him, a toast without touching. Cal raised his own. They drank. 20 minutes later, they were laughing about the new interstate they were building up north, how it would ruin everything good about Vermont. 30 minutes after that, she was touching his forearm when she spoke. Light, accidental, deliberate. By 11, he was offering to drive her home. Said his truck was right outside. She said her husband was away on a timber buying trip up to St. Johnsbury. Said she hated driving these back roads alone at night. Cal paid the tab. The truck was a '52 Dodge Power Wagon. Red, rusty at the fenders, smelled like motor oil and Old Spice. Ellery sat close enough that her thigh brushed his when he shifted gears. The farmhouse was dark when they pulled in. Only the porch light on. Inside, the kitchen was warm. A single lamp burned over the table. A bottle of Canadian Club waited beside 2 clean glasses. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. "I'll get ice." Cal sat at the table, watched her move. She came back with the ice bucket, and Harlan. He stepped through the doorway from the pantry like he'd been waiting there all along. Quiet. Calm. A shotgun rested in the crook of his left arm. Not pointed, just present. Cal's chair scraped back an inch. Ellery smiled the same smile she'd worn in the bar. "Cal, this is my husband Harlan. He got back early." Cal's mouth opened, closed. The whiskey had made his thoughts slow. Harlan spoke first. "Evening, Cal. I hear you've been kind to my wife." Cal tried to stand. His knees didn't cooperate. Ellery poured 3 fingers of Canadian Club into each glass. She added something else to Cal's. A few careful drops from the brown bottle she kept in her apron pocket. The liquid vanished into the amber without a trace. She handed him the glass. "Drink up," she said softly. "You look like you need it." Cal stared at the glass, then at the shotgun, then at Ellery. He drank. The belladonna hit faster than whiskey. First his vision narrowed, then his tongue swelled. Then the room began to tilt like a carnival ride. Harlan set the shotgun against the wall. He didn't need it anymore. Ellery moved behind Cal's chair. She slipped the picture wire from her sleeve. Same spool, same thin steel. She crossed it in front, leaned in close enough that her lips almost touched his ear. "You were very sweet in the bar," she whispered. "I almost didn't want to do this." She pulled. Cal's hands came up. Too late, too weak. He clawed at the wire. His nails left red half-moons on his own neck. Harlan watched from the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable. When it was over, Ellery let the wire go slack. She smoothed Cal's hair back from his forehead. Then she kissed the top of his head, once, very lightly. Harlan stepped forward. "Truck stays here tonight," he said. "We'll drive it to the quarry road tomorrow. Make it look like he went off the shoulder after closing." Ellery nodded. They carried Cal to the root cellar, the same place they'd stored apples the year before, the same place the earth stayed cool and damp. Harlan arranged the body on an old door laid across 2 sawhorses. Ellery placed Cal's grease-stained hands in his lap. She folded his fingers around the empty whiskey glass. A final touch. Upstairs, she poured herself a fresh martini. Real one this time. She sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house. Listened to the crickets outside. The clock ticked toward midnight. Harlan came up the stairs. wiped his hands on a dish towel. Ellery looked at him. "Next time," she said, "maybe we try the garden shed. More room to talk." Harlan considered it. Then he nodded. "Garden shed," he agreed. Outside, the August night pressed against the windows. Thick, heavy, full of insects and secrets. The porch light stayed on until dawn. Part 4. The Guest in the Cellar. Vermont, September 1960. The hitchhiker's name was Marjorie Hale, 29, divorced, traveling light, one brown valise, one pair of low-heeled pumps worn thin at the heels, and a paperback copy of The Group by Mary McCarthy tucked under her arm. She had been standing at the junction of Route 12 and the old Bar Montpelier Road for almost 40 minutes when the Voss Chevrolet pulled over. Ellery leaned across Harlan and rolled down the passenger window. Her smile was warm, practiced, the same one she used at church suppers. "Need a lift, honey?" she called. Marjorie hesitated only a second. The September evening was turning cool. She climbed in the back seat with a grateful sigh. "Thank you. I'm headed toward White River Junction. Anything south is good." Ellery turned halfway in her seat. "White River's not far out of our way. We live just outside Montpelier. You're welcome to stay the night if you'd like. We've got a spare room, fresh sheets, hot coffee in the morning." Marjorie laughed softly. "You're too kind. I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Harlan said from the driver's seat. His voice was low, steady. "Folks help folks up here." They drove in companionable quiet for the first few miles. Marjorie talked about her ex-husband, a salesman who drank, about her job as a typist at an insurance office in Rutland, about how she was going to start over in Connecticut. Ellery listened, nodded, asked gentle questions. When they reached the farmhouse, the porch light was already on. Moths circled it in slow spirals. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Ellery poured coffee, strong, black. She added a small pour of cream to Marjorie's cup, and 3 careful drops from the brown bottle she kept behind the flour tin. Marjorie sipped, smiled. "Didn't realize how cold I was." Ellery touched her arm. "Come see the cellar. We've got apples down there. You can take some for the road tomorrow." They descended the narrow wooden stairs. The cellar was cool, dim, lit by one bare bulb. Shelves lined the walls, jars of pickles, tomatoes, green beans. A wooden door lay across 2 sawhorses, the same one they'd used for Cal Dupuy 3 years earlier. Marjorie admired the preserves. Ellery stood close behind her. The first sign something was wrong came when Marjorie's knees buckled. She caught herself on the shelf. A jar of peaches tipped and shattered on the dirt floor. "Oh," she started. Ellery caught her before she fell completely, guided her to the door, laid her down gently. Marjorie's eyes were wide, her breathing shallow. The belladonna was working. Slow this time, because Ellery had used less. Harlan appeared at the top of the stairs. He didn't speak, just watched. Ellery knelt beside Marjorie, brushed hair from her forehead. "You're not going to Connecticut," she said quietly. "Not tonight." Marjorie tried to speak. Only a whisper came out. "Please." Ellery shushed her, like a mother with a feverish child. "We're going to talk," she said. "For a while. Then we'll decide." They kept her alive for 3 days. Each morning, Ellery brought a thin broth laced with tiny doses, enough to keep the heart beating, the lungs working, but never enough to clear the fog. Marjorie lay on the door, wrists tied to the sawhorse legs with soft cotton cord, a bucket beside her for necessities. They talked, or rather Ellery talked, and Marjorie listened. Sometimes sobbed, sometimes begged. Ellery told her about little James, how he'd been born blue and never really pinkened up, how the doctors said it was his heart, how he'd died at 17 months, small and silent in her arms. She told Marjorie how sometimes she still heard him crying in the night, how Harlan had stopped sleeping in their bed for almost a year after. Harlan rarely came down. When he did, he stood in the doorway, listened, then went back upstairs to split wood or mend fence. On the third evening, Marjorie's voice had grown so weak it was barely audible. Ellery sat on an overturned crate beside her. She held Marjorie's hand. "You've been very brave," she said. "Most people scream. You only cried." Marjorie's lips moved. Nothing came out. Ellery leaned close. "I think we've talked enough." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the picture wire. Same spool, same thin steel. She slipped the loop around Marjorie's throat, crossed it, pulled. This time it was quick. When it was over, Ellery sat for a long minute, stroking Marjorie's hair. Then she stood. Harlan came down the stairs. He carried the shovel. They buried her in the apple orchard, under the oldest tree, where the ground was soft and the roots wouldn't complain. Ellery planted daffodil bulbs over the spot, said they'd come up yellow in the spring. That night they ate supper at the kitchen table. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, applesauce from the last of the jars. Ellery looked across the table at her husband. "She was nice," she said. "Quiet. Listened well." Harlan nodded. "Next one," he said. "Maybe we don't talk so long." Ellery smiled. Small. Private. "Maybe," she agreed. Outside, the September wind moved through the orchard. The old tree creaked. Somewhere beneath its roots, Marjorie Hale slept. The daffodils would bloom next April. Bright, yellow, oblivious. Two for the Road, Vermont, July 1963. The summer of 1963 was the hottest anyone in central Vermont could remember. Asphalt shimmered on Route 2. Cicadas screamed from every tree. Even the cows stood in the streams instead of grazing. A young couple stood thumbing rides near the turnoff to East Montpelier. They looked like they'd stepped out of a folk song. Danny Moreau, 21, thin as a rail, wearing a faded chambray shirt and jeans rolled at the cuffs. Beside him, his girlfriend, Lila Moreau, née Thibodeau, 19, long chestnut hair tied back with a red bandana, cotton sundress printed with tiny daisies, bare feet in sandals. They were headed to Burlington. Danny wanted to find work on the lake boats. Lila wanted to see the city lights. The Chevrolet pulled over in a slow, polite arc. Dust settled around the tires. Ellery leaned out the passenger window. Her hair was going gray at the temples now, but she still pinned it the same way. Still smiled the same way. "Hot day for walking," she called. "We're going toward Burlington. Hop in." Danny grinned. Lila hesitated only a second, then climbed into the back seat beside him. Harlan drove. Silent. Steady. The conversation started easy. Danny talked about the draft. He'd registered, but hoped the war in Vietnam stayed small. Lila talked about wanting to be a nurse. Ellery listened, asked about their families, their plans. After 20 minutes, Ellery turned in her seat. "I made lemonade this morning. Fresh. It's in the cooler behind you. Help yourselves." Danny reached back, found the metal cooler, pulled out 2 mason jars. Lemonade the color of pale sunlight. He handed one to Lila. They both drank. The belladonna was in Danny's jar only, a heavier dose this time. Harlan had measured it himself the night before. 10 minutes later, Danny's head lolled against the seat. His eyelids fluttered. Lila noticed first. "Danny?" She touched his cheek. "Danny, what's wrong?" Ellery answered for him. "He's just tired, honey. Long day in the sun. We'll get him inside. Let him rest." The farmhouse appeared around the next bend. They carried Danny in first. Harlan took him under the arms, Ellery the legs. Lila followed, bewildered, clutching her small purse. In the kitchen, Harlan laid Danny on the linoleum. He wasn't moving much anymore, just shallow breaths, eyes half open. Lila started to cry. "What did you do to him?" Ellery stepped close, put an arm around Lila's shoulders, like a mother, like a friend. "Come with me, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's get you some water." She led Lila down the cellar stairs. The root cellar was the same as always. Cool, dim. The wooden door still on its sawhorses. This time there were 2 chairs, one for each. Ellery sat Lila down, tied her wrists with the same soft cotton cord. Lila didn't fight. She was too stunned. Upstairs, Harlan finished with Danny. He used the wire. Quick. Clean. No need to draw it out. Then he carried the body to the back porch, wrapped it in the canvas tarp. Downstairs, Ellery sat facing Lila. She held both of the girl's hands. "You're very pretty," she said. "Like I was once." Lila's voice shook. "Please, just let us go." "We won't tell anyone." Ellery tilted her head, smiled, small, private. "That's what they all say." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled the wire. Lila's eyes went wide. Upstairs, Harlan heard the first muffled sound, a choked gasp, then silence. He waited. When Ellery came back up the stairs, her dress was spotless. She smoothed her hair. Harlan looked at her. "Both done?" Ellery nodded. "They were sweet together," she said. "Reminded me of us. Before." Harlan grunted. He was already thinking logistics. They staged the accident on the quarry road just after midnight. Danny behind the wheel of their own beat-up Ford Falcon, Lila in the passenger seat. The car nosed into a shallow ravine. Brakes not applied, engine still warm. They poured gasoline over the hood. Lit it. The flames took fast. From the trees they watched it burn, orange against the black summer sky. Back at the farmhouse, Ellery found Danny's Zippo in the pocket of his shirt. She kept it, added it to the small wooden box under the floorboards in their bedroom. The box already held a Sacred Heart medal, a grease-stained handkerchief, a paperback of the group with Marjorie Hale's name written inside, a pair of red bandana scraps. She closed the lid. The next morning, the local paper ran a small item: local couple perishes in single-vehicle crash. Police said it looked like the driver fell asleep. Alcohol suspected, but not confirmed. No one connected it to the other disappearances. Not yet. But in the state police barracks in Waterbury, a detective named Raymond Pelletier kept a corkboard. 4 missing persons in 8 years, all last seen on back roads, all young, all traveling alone or in pairs. He pinned a new newspaper clipping to the board, stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote one word in pencil across the top: Pattern? Outside Montpelier, the summer kept burning. The cicadas kept screaming, and somewhere in the Voss farmhouse, a small wooden box waited under the floorboards, growing heavier with every passing year. Part 6. The Pattern and the Neighbor. Vermont, October 1965. Detective Raymond Pelletier kept the corkboard in the corner of his office at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Waterbury. No one called it the Voss board yet, not out loud. 7 missing persons now, all vanished from the same rough triangle: Montpelier, Barre, East Montpelier. All last seen hitchhiking or walking rural roads, all young. No bodies, no ransom notes, no signs of struggle reported by anyone. Pelletier had pinned a hand-drawn map to the center, red pins for each disappearance, a faint pencil circle around the Voss farm, drawn 2 years earlier after a gas station attendant remembered seeing a dark Chevrolet Bel Air pick up a hitchhiker near the same spot twice in one summer. It was thin, very thin. But Pelletier was patient. He'd started driving past the Voss place once a week, never stopping, just slow enough to notice details: freshly turned earth in the orchard, a new coat of whitewash on the barn, Harlan splitting wood in the side yard with the same steady rhythm every time. He also started asking questions, quiet ones. At Bouchard's garage, the owner remembered Cal Dupuy's truck had disappeared the same week Cal did. "Funny thing," Bouchard said. "Never did find that power wagon." At the post office, the clerk recalled Marjorie Hale had a forwarding address set for Connecticut. Never picked up her mail. Pelletier wrote it all down in a green notebook he kept in his breast pocket. Meanwhile, on the farm, the air had grown heavier. Harlan noticed the state cruiser first. Same one. Same slow pass every Tuesday afternoon. He didn't say anything to Ellery for 3 weeks. Then, one evening, as they sat on the porch shelling peas, he spoke. "State police been by again." Ellery's hands paused. She looked up. The sunset turned her face the color of old copper. "How often?" "Regular." She nodded once, resumed shelling. "We've been careful," she said. Harlan cracked a pod between his fingers. "Careful's not the same as invisible." That night they argued, quietly, the way they always argued. In the kitchen, low voices, no raised hands. Ellery wanted to stop for a while. Harlan thought stopping would look more suspicious than continuing. They compromised. They would be more selective. No more hitchhikers. No more strangers who might be missed right away. But the need, the quiet, gnawing need, didn't go away. Their neighbor, Amos Tuttle, lived a half-mile down the ridge. 72, widowed. Talked too much when he drank coffee at the diner. Lately, he'd started asking Harlan about the extra cars he'd seen pulling into the Voss driveway at night. Amos never came right out and accused, but he hinted, joked, watched. One October morning, Amos walked up the dirt road with a jar of his wife's last peach preserves. A neighborly gesture. Harlan met him at the gate. "Morning, Amos." "Morning, Harlan. Brought you some peaches. Thought Ellery might like 'em for pie." Harlan took the jar, nodded. Amos lingered, scratched his neck. "Say, Harlan, you folks been having company lately? Seen lights down your way after dark a few times." Ellery appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Amos," she said warmly, "how nice of you. Come in for coffee?" Amos hesitated, then smiled. Don't mind if I do. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon rolls. Ellery poured coffee, strong, black. She added 3 careful drops to Amos's cup while his back was turned. They talked about the weather, the price of hay, the new highway coming through next year. Amos drank, then drank more. 20 minutes later, his speech slurred. His eyelids drooped. Harlan helped him to the cellar. Ellery followed with the wire. This one was different. No talking, no stories, just quick, efficient. They buried him in the far corner of the woodlot, under a stand of white pine. The ground was soft there. Needles covered the spot in minutes. But Amos had been careful in his own way. He'd left a note on his kitchen table that morning. Going up to Voss' place for coffee, back by noon. When he didn't return, his daughter in Barry called the sheriff's office by supper time. The next day, a deputy knocked on the Voss door. Ellery answered, smile perfect. Morning, officer. Something wrong? Amos Tuttle, the deputy said. His daughter's worried. Said he was coming here yesterday. Ellery tilted her head. Oh, yes, he stopped by. Brought peaches. We had coffee. He left around 11. Said he was going into town. The deputy wrote it down. Did he seem all right? Fine, as far as I could tell, Ellery answered. A little tired, maybe, but cheerful. The deputy thanked them, left. That night, Harlan stood at the kitchen window, watching the dark road. Ellery came up behind him, put a hand on his back. We'll be fine, she said. Harlan didn't answer. In Waterbury, Pelletier pinned a new red pin to the map. Amos Tuttle, last seen heading toward the Voss farm. He stared at the circle he'd drawn years ago. Then he picked up the phone. Get me Judge Harlow, he said quietly. I think it's time we ask for a warrant. Outside the Voss farmhouse, the October wind moved through the white pines. The needles whispered, covering the new-turned earth. Somewhere beneath them, Amos Tuttle slept, and the circle on the map was getting smaller. Part 7. The Knock at Dawn. Vermont, November 1965. The warrant came at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. November sky still black, frost thick on the grass, the kind that cracks underfoot like thin glass. Detective Raymond Pelletier led the team himself. 4 state troopers in plain clothes, 2 sheriff's deputies, 1 canine handler with a German shepherd named Duke, who kept his ears up the whole drive. They parked a quarter-mile down the ridge road, walked the rest of the way in silence, flashlights off, breath fogging in the cold. The farmhouse looked asleep, porch light off, curtains drawn, only the faintest smoke from the chimney. Pelletier knocked. 3 firm raps. Waited. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. Inside, Harlan Voss was already awake. He'd heard the crunch of tires on gravel 5 minutes earlier. He stood at the kitchen window now, shotgun in hand, barrel down. Ellery came down the stairs in her robe, hair loose, face pale but calm. They're here, Harlan said. Ellery nodded once. She walked to the door, opened it before the 3rd knock. Good morning, officers, she said, her voice soft, almost polite. Pelletier held up the folded paper. Mrs. Voss, we have a search warrant for the premises. Issued by Judge Harlow. We'd like to speak with you and your husband. Ellery stepped aside. Let me get Harlan. The team moved in quickly. Troopers to the barn, deputies upstairs, canine to the yard. Harlan met them in the kitchen, shotgun still in his hand, not raised. Pelletier looked at the weapon. Sir, we'd appreciate it if you set that down. Harlan considered it, then laid the shotgun on the table, barrel pointed toward the wall. Ellery poured coffee, offered it. No one accepted. The search began methodically. Upstairs, drawers opened, floorboards checked, closet contents spread on the bed. Nothing. Barn. Hay bales moved, tools examined, floor swept. Nothing. Yard. Duke the shepherd worked the orchard first. Nose low, tail stiff. At the oldest apple tree he sat. Barked once. Sharp. The handler called Pelletier over. Something here. They dug carefully. Shovels biting soft earth. 6 inches down, a small bone. Human phalanx. Then another. Pelletier exhaled through his nose. Keep going. 20 minutes later, they uncovered the first tarp. Marjorie Hale. Still recognizable. Hair long and dark. Daffodil bulbs she'd been planted over had started to sprout, even in November. The deputies kept digging. In the woodlot, under the white pines, Amos Tuttle. Jaw still set in the same stubborn line he'd worn at the diner. In the far field, beneath a patch of new sod, the canvas-wrapped bundle that had once been Danny and Lila Moreau. The fire on the quarry road had been good theater, but not good enough. The bodies had been moved. Pelletier walked back to the house. Ellery and Harlan sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, quiet. He placed a small evidence bag in front of them. Inside, a Sacred Heart medal, a grease-stained handkerchief, a Zippo lighter engraved R.L. Do you recognize these items? Pelletier asked. Harlan looked at the bag, then at his wife. Ellery reached out, touched the plastic through the table. Pretty things, she said softly. Someone must have lost them. Pelletier nodded to the trooper behind him. Harlan Voss, Ellery Voss, you're both under arrest for the murders of Raymond LeClaire, Calvin Dupuis, Marjorie Hale, Amos Tuttle, Daniel Moreau, Lila Moreau, and others yet to be identified. You have the right to remain silent. He read the rest. Ellery listened with her head tilted, like she was hearing a hymn she hadn't sung in years. Harlan stood when they cuffed him, didn't resist. As they led them out to the cruisers, Ellery paused on the porch, looked back at the house, at the orchard, at the thin gray dawn coming over the ridge. She smiled, small, private. Then she stepped down the stairs. The cruisers pulled away in convoy, red lights flashing against the frost. Duke the shepherd sat in the yard, watching the cars disappear down the road. Behind him, the old apple tree stood silent, its roots deep, its secrets half exposed. In the kitchen, on the table, the coffee cups were still warm. No one drank them. Part 8. The Interrogation Room, Vermont, November 1965 to December 1965. The Montpelier Barracks interrogation room smelled of old coffee, cigarette ash, and the faint metallic tang of fear that never quite left the walls. 2 rooms, side by side, separated by a thin plaster partition that let every raised voice bleed through. Harlan Voss sat in room A, hands cuffed to the metal table ring. Gray flannel shirt still smelling of wood smoke. Face expressionless. Eyes fixed on a spot 6 inches above the detective's head. Detective Raymond Pelletier sat across from him. Green notebook open. Pencil tapping once. Twice. "Mr. Voss," Pelletier began, "we've found 6 bodies so far. More coming up every hour. The medical examiner says at least 2 of them were alive for days. Talk to me. Help me understand why." Harlan's gaze drifted down, met Pelletier's eyes for the first time. "I don't know what you're talking about." Pelletier slid a photograph across the table. Black and white, 8 by 10. Marjorie Hale's face, half exposed from the tarp. The daffodil bulbs still clinging to her hair. Harlan looked at it, looked away. Pelletier tried again. "Your wife is in the next room. She's talking. She's told us about the belladonna, about the wire, about the little boy you lost, James. She says it started after him." Harlan's jaw tightened. One muscle, very small. "She's lying," he said quietly. Pelletier leaned forward. "Then tell me the truth." Silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. Harlan spoke. "We helped people, gave them rides, coffee, a place to rest. Some of them didn't want to leave." Pelletier wrote it down. "Didn't want to leave. So you killed them?" Harlan shrugged. One shoulder, barely. "They were already leaving, one way or another." In room B, Ellery sat with her hands folded in her lap. No cuffs. A female trooper stood by the door. A young detective named Margaret Hale, no relation, asked the questions. Ellery answered in a soft, even voice, almost conversational. "Yes, the tincture was belladonna. Harlan got it years ago, for pain. I used it to calm them, so they wouldn't be afraid." Margaret Hale wrote carefully. "And the wire?" Ellery touched her throat, lightly, as if remembering the feel of it. "That was gentler, faster. I didn't want them to suffer." She smiled, small, private. "Some of them told me things, beautiful things, about their lives, about people they loved. I kept listening until the end." Margaret looked up. "Why keep the souvenirs? The medal, the lighter, the book?" Ellery tilted her head. "They were gifts from our guests. I liked to remember them." The evidence room was filling. The small wooden box from under the floorboards had been catalogued. Sacred Heart Medal, Raymond LeClaire. Zippo lighter, R.L., Raymond LeClaire. Grease-stained handkerchief, Calvin Dupuis. Paperback The Group with Marjorie Hale's name in blue ink. Red bandana fragment, Lila Moreau. One silver cufflink, Amos Tuttle. A child's tiny knit sock, found in the back of the box. No one asked whose it was. The state chemist confirmed the belladonna residue in multiple jars from the kitchen cupboard. Traces on spoons, on a measuring dropper. The wire spool, still half full, matched the ligature marks on every neck. Microscopic comparison showed the same twist pattern. Newspapers picked up the story by the 3rd day. Front page of the Burlington Free Press. Montpelier couple charged in string of grisly murders. Below it, a grainy photo of the farmhouse. The porch lights still on in the picture, as if waiting for someone to come home. Radio stations carried it statewide. People in diners talked in low voices. Mothers kept their children closer. hitchhikers vanished from the roads overnight. In separate rooms, Harlan and Ellery were asked the same question dozens of times. How many? Harlan never answered with a number. Ellery, once, after 3 hours of gentle questions, looked at Margaret Hale and whispered, "Enough to fill a quiet house." She didn't elaborate. By December, the grand jury had heard enough. Indictments returned on 7 counts of first-degree murder. More charges pending as the digging continued. Peltier stood outside the courthouse in the snow, coat collar up, cigarette burning down to the filter. A reporter approached. "Detective, do you think they'll confess fully?" Peltier exhaled smoke into the cold air. "They already have," he said, "each in their own way." Inside the holding cells, Harlan and Ellery were kept apart. No contact visits, no letters. But every evening, at lights out, Ellery would sing, very softly, the same old French-Canadian lullaby she'd hummed while digging the first grave. Quand j'étais chez mon père, petit et jeune garçon. The sound drifted down the corridor, through the bars, past the guards who pretended not to hear. Harlan never sang back, but he listened, always. The trial date was set for March 1966, in Montpelier Superior Court, Judge Harlow presiding. Outside, winter settled over Vermont like a heavy quilt. Snow covered the orchard, covered the woodlot, covered the places where the earth had been opened and closed again. Underneath, the roots waited, patient, silent. And in 2 separate cells, 2 people waited for spring. The courtroom in March, Vermont, March 1966. The Montpelier Superior Court building was built in 1859 of gray Barry granite. It had survived fires, floods, and 2 world wars. On the morning of March 14, 1966, it looked smaller than usual under a low, pewter sky. Inside Courtroom 1, the benches were packed. Reporters from Burlington, Rutland, even Boston. Local families who had known the victims. Neighbors who had waved at the Voss Chevrolet for years without knowing. A few college students from UVM who came for the sociology of it all. The air smelled of wet wool, floor polish, and nervous sweat. Judge Elias Harlow presided. 68, white hair, voice like gravel under boots. He had signed the search warrant himself. Now he sat high behind the bench, gavel resting beside his right hand. The prosecution team was led by State's Attorney Victor Langlois. Tall, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, he spoke in measured sentences, never raised his voice. Didn't need to. Defense counsel was a pair. Harold Hal Redmond for Harlan, a barrel-chested man who'd defended bootleggers in the 30s, and Clara Whitcomb for Ellery, younger, sharp, one of the first women admitted to the Vermont bar after the war. She wore a charcoal suit and a single strand of pearls. The defendants sat side by side at the counsel table, separated by their lawyers. Harlan wore a dark gray suit that hung loose on him now. He'd lost 20 pounds since November. Face carved deeper, eyes fixed on the far wall. Ellery wore a navy dress with a white collar, hair pinned neatly, hands folded in her lap. She looked almost serene. The jury was 12, 8 men, 4 women. Farmers, a school teacher, a hardware store owner, a widow. All from Washington County. None had asked to be excused. Opening statements lasted 2 hours. Langlois stood at the podium, quiet, deliberate. These are not crimes of passion, not crimes of greed. They are crimes of choice. Over and over, the defendants chose to invite strangers into their home, chose to drug them, chose to strangle them, chose to bury them in their orchard, their woodlot, their fields. They kept mementos, they kept count, they kept going. He paused, looked at each juror in turn. The evidence will show 7 identified victims. We believe there are more. We will show the belladonna, the wire, the box under the floorboards, the bodies unearthed from the earth they walked every day. He sat. Hal Redmond rose slowly. My client, Harlan Voss, is a man who worked hard his whole life. A farmer, a husband, a father who lost his only child. What you will hear is tragedy turned to madness. Not evil, not calculation, grief. Clara Whitcomb followed. Ellery Voss is not a monster. She is a woman who once cradled a dying infant, who never recovered. The state will try to paint her as cold, as cruel. But what you will see is a broken mind, a shared delusion. A couple who convinced themselves they were offering mercy. The evidence began the next day. Langlois called the medical examiner first, Dr. Evelyn Moreau, no relation to the victims. She testified for 3 hours, described ligature marks, belladonna levels in tissue samples, time of death estimates, cause, asphyxiation by ligature in every case. Then the chemist. Then the fingerprint technician who matched Harlan's prints to the wire spool. Then Detective Pelletier. He walked the jury through the corkboard map, the timeline, the disappearances, the search, the bodies. When he reached the photograph of the small wooden box, he stopped. Inside this box, recovered from beneath the floorboards of the Voss bedroom, were these items. He held up evidence bags one by one. A Sacred Heart medal belonging to Raymond Leclerc, a Zippo lighter engraved with his initials, a handkerchief belonging to Calvin Dupuis, a paperback novel belonging to Marjorie Hale, a fragment of a red bandana belonging to Lila Moreau, a silver cufflink belonging to Amos Tuttle. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pencils on reporters' pads. Pelletier looked at the jury. These were not trophies of victory. They were keepsakes, memories. The defendants kept them close, every day. Cross-examination was brief. Redmond asked Pelletier if there was any direct evidence Harlan had ever held the wire. Pelletier answered calmly. No fingerprints on the wire itself, but the spool was in their home. The belladonna was in their cupboard. The bodies were in their fields. Whitcomb asked if Ellery had ever confessed in writing. Pelletier shook his head. She spoke. She described the method, the motive, the victims, in her own words. The state rested after 8 days. The defense called a psychiatrist from Boston, Dr. Leonard Weiss. He testified that both defendants exhibited signs of shared psychotic disorder, triggered by the death of their son, a folie à deux. He said Ellery genuinely believed she was helping the victims, that Harlan followed because he could not bear to leave her alone in her pain. Langlois cross-examined gently. Doctor, if this was a shared delusion, why did they hide the bodies? Why did they stage accidents? Why did they keep the souvenirs hidden under the floor? Weiss hesitated. Even in delusion, there is awareness of consequence. The defense rested. Closing arguments. Langlois spoke last. There is no excuse for what happened in that farmhouse. No grief deep enough. No illness severe enough. These were deliberate acts, repeated, planned, enjoyed. He looked at the jury. Find them guilty, on all counts. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They returned at 4:17 p.m. on March 28th. Foreman stood, a dairy farmer from Calais. We, the jury, find the defendants, Harlan Voss and Ellery Voss, guilty of murder in the first degree on all 7 counts. The courtroom exhaled. Judge Harlow polled the jury, one by one. Each said guilty. Sentencing was set for the following week. On April 4, 1966, Judge Harlow read the sentence. For the crime of murder in the first degree, this court sentences you, Harlan Voss, to death by hanging. For the crime of murder in the first degree, this court sentences you, Ellery Voss, to death by hanging. He paused. The executions will be carried out at the Vermont State Prison in Windsor, at a date to be determined by the warden. He struck the gavel once. Ellery looked at Harlan across the table. She smiled. Small, private. Harlan nodded. Once. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall again. Soft, steady. It covered the granite steps, covered the reporters' notebooks, covered everything. Inside the holding van, as they were driven back to separate cells, Ellery whispered through the partition, "Spring will come soon." Harlan answered from the other side, "Yes." The van rolled on, toward Windsor, toward the gallows, toward the end they had both known was waiting. Part 10. The Waiting and the Unfound. Vermont, April 1966 through January 1968. The Vermont State Prison in Windsor was built of the same gray granite as the courthouse, but colder, thicker walls, narrower windows. The gallows chamber sat in the basement, unused since 1954. The state had kept the rope, though, oiled, coiled, ready. Harlan Voss occupied cell 14B on death row. 8 by 10, cot, toilet, sink. A small barred window high up that showed only sky. He spent most days sitting on the cot, hands on his knees, staring at the concrete floor. The guards called him the Quiet One. He never asked for extra food, never complained about the cold, never spoke unless spoken to. Once a week the chaplain came, Reverend Paul Emery, soft voice, wire-rimmed glasses. He offered scripture, offered prayer. Harlan always listened politely, never accepted the Bible. "I'm not looking for forgiveness," he said once. "I'm waiting for the end." Ellery was in the women's wing, 2 corridors away. Cell 7C. Same size, same gray. She was different. She sang. Every evening, after lights out, the same lullaby drifted down the hall. Soft, barely audible, but steady. Quand j'étais chez mon père, petit et jeune garçon. The other inmates on the row stopped complaining when she sang. Some listened. Some cried. Some pretended not to hear. She wrote letters she never sent. To James. To the children who never were. To the strangers who had sat at her kitchen table. She folded them carefully, tucked them under her mattress. On visiting days, once a month, she asked to see Harlan. The warden allowed it after the first year, through glass, on telephones. They sat facing each other, no touching. First time, Ellery pressed her palm to the glass. Harlan did the same. "You still remember the first one?" she asked. "Raymond," he said. She nodded. "He told me about the ocean in Korea. Said it was the color of jade." Harlan looked at her face. The lines deeper now. The eyes still bright. "You ever think about the ones we didn't find?" she whispered. Harlan's mouth moved, almost a smile. "Sometimes." They didn't speak the number. They didn't need to. The appeals dragged. First to the Vermont Supreme Court. Denied. Then federal habeas corpus. Denied. The execution date was finally set, January 15th, 1968. 2 days before, the warden came to each cell. Harlan asked for a last meal. Steak, medium rare, mashed potatoes, apple pie. Ellery asked for coffee, black, and a slice of apple pie. The morning of the 15th was clear, very cold. The sky the color of new tin. They were taken separately, Harlan first. He walked the corridor in silence, hands cuffed behind him, 2 guards on each side. In the chamber, the rope waited. 13 coils, standard drop. The warden read the warrant. Harlan looked at the ceiling, then at the trap door. He spoke once. "Tell her I'm sorry." The warden nodded. The black hood went over his head. The lever pulled. A soft snap. A long silence. Ellery was next. She walked with her head up. No hood requested. She asked to sing one last time. The warden allowed it. She sang the lullaby all the way through. Her voice never wavered. When it ended, she looked at the witnesses, Pelletier among them, and smiled. Small, private. "I hope someone finds the rest," she said softly. Then the hood, then the drop. The bodies were buried in the prison cemetery. No markers, no names. Just 2 plots side by side. Years later, in 1974, the farm was sold. The new owners tore down the house, plowed the orchard flat. They found nothing. But sometimes, on quiet autumn evenings, people walking the old Tote Road near East Montpelier swear they hear a woman humming, soft, distant, and sometimes, very rarely, a child's laugh follows it. No one stays to listen long. The wind moves through the pines. The needles fall, covering everything. And somewhere, under roots that have grown thick and deep, the earth keeps its secrets. Still, quiet, patient.